Hello, I'm Danielle, and I'm going to be evaluating a case that happened back in 2001. It's titled Longnecker versus Loyola University Medical Center and Dr. Sirish Parvatheneni. Basically, this is a case of an unsuccessful heart transplant that resulted in the death of Mr. Carl Longnecker. So his wife was filing a lawsuit on behalf of him for potential negligence on part of one of the surgeons in the process and Loyola University Medical Center as a whole. So some background on Mr. Carl Longnecker. He was a man in his late 50s, and he had had 3 heart attacks in his life so far. Due to his young age, he was high up on that transplant list. So he was preparing for surgery to get a heart at Loyola University Medical Center when this case took place. Now, Loyola University takes a team approach to their heart transplant process. They have a nurse coordinator, a transplant cardiologist, a procuring surgeon, and a transplant surgeon. The first step in the process is once the donor has been officially deceased, the Regional Organ Bank of Illinois, in this case, is going to go in and evaluate the patient for risk factors and find out some demographic information. Now, in this case, once the donor had been deceased, they evaluated him and found out that he was a 46-year-old gentleman with uncontrolled hypertension, mild to moderate coronary artery disease, left ventricular hypertrophy, and had smoked marijuana, cigarettes, and had possibly done cocaine in his life. So this report was evaluated by the transplant cardiologist, and he is either going to accept or reject the heart preliminarily. This is a paper report, so he doesn't actually have the heart in front of him. In this case, the transplant cardiologist did preliminarily accept the heart. The next step in the process is the procuring surgeon, and he or she is going to go to the donor heart and actually evaluate it with their hands. So palpating the heart, feeling for defects or signs of hypertrophy or disease. In this case, the procuring surgeon was Dr. Parvatheneni, and after receiving the call that the heart had been accepted, he went to the donor and evaluated it with his hands and visually inspected it. Now, the procuring surgeon is responsible for making that final call to the medical center where the transplant surgeon is waiting with the transplant patient. So Dr. Parvatheneni, made that call over to the transplant surgeon and continued to accept the heart and move it forward for transplantation. Now, the transplant surgeon went ahead with the procedure. However, after removing Mr. Longnecker's native heart and receiving the new heart from the procuring surgeon, he immediately knew upon holding it in his hands that it had a significant amount of hypertrophy and stenosis, and that it was pretty unfit for a transplantation. However, he went along with the procedure and ended up transplanting the heart into Mr. Longnecker. Now, Mr. Longnecker never regained consciousness, and he ended up passing away 4 days later after the procedure. After the wife of Carl Longnecker, Connie Longnecker, realized that her husband was going to die as a result of this unsuccessful transplantation, she went ahead and filed a lawsuit in 2 parts. First, she claimed that Dr. Parvatheneni, the procuring surgeon, committed professional negligence when he failed to properly and sufficiently inspect the donor heart, which resulted directly in her husband's death. She also claimed that Loyola University Medical Center committed institutional negligence when they failed to ensure that Dr. Parvatheneni, the procuring surgeon, understood his role as a part of the transplant team. After the court proceedings had gone through, the case was found to be in favor of Dr. Parvatheneni, and so they rejected that professional negligence claim, and he was not charged specifically with anything. However, they were found to be against Loyola University Medical Center for the institutional negligence claim. So in the end, Mrs. Longnecker did receive $2.7 million as a part of the winning this case. Now, down the road, after years of deliberation, they actually reversed this court decision because some more information had come out about the exact role of the members of the transplant team, and there's a lot of confusion involved. So right now it was being called for further proceedings. To this present day, I'm not sure if it has been completely resolved yet. After reading through this case a few times, my first opinion is, of course, the loss of life is tragic and should not have happened. And there were a lot of players in here that affected that outcome. First of all, the transplant cardiologist went ahead and accepted the heart, even knowing on paper that there were some really big red flags with the condition of the heart. Secondly, the procuring surgeon, Dr. Parvatheneni, continued to accept the heart even after he fulfilled his role, or supposedly fulfilled his role, of visualizing and manually inspecting the heart. Lastly, the transplant surgeon knew as soon as he felt that donor heart that it was hypertrophic and way too diseased to be valuable for the patient. He even wrote in his surgical notes, in all caps, hypertrophic heart, and still went along with that transplant. So in my mind, now I'm not a cardiothoracic surgeon, I know the native heart had already been removed, but you could either, if you can transplant a new heart into a patient, you can retransplant the old heart, I'm sure. And the case also noted that there was an artificial heart on standby in case things went wrong that they could have used. So that was my kind of gut instincts of how I felt about the roles that the transplant team played in this case. Since the case emphasizes Dr. Parvatheneni, the procuring surgeon, as one of the main actors in this case, I'm going to focus on him for the ethical analysis. So first of all, I believe what the transplant team and what Dr. Parvatheneni did was legal, however, it was unethical. They followed the rules of what their job titles should be doing. Did they follow them all the way through? Not necessarily. Now, Dr. Parvatheneni, in this case, completely violated the prima facie healthcare principles of non-maleficence and beneficence. And unfortunately, the patient paid the ultimate price, which was death. Now, by going through with this heart transplant, he may have thought initially that he would be benefiting the patient and doing more benefit than harm, because he would be living out his life with a heart that was in better condition than his own. However, that of course was not the case when the heart was found to be so hypertrophic that it could not support life. The transplant team in this case was really basing their actions off of rules, ethics, and this is common, like we said in class, in the healthcare world. They were paying attention to what the procedure says they're supposed to do and staying within each of those roles. And there were many spots in which different parts of the team could have spoken up. For example, the transplant surgeon, who I feel should be held more responsible for this than he's currently being held, he could have stopped the transplantation process as soon as he felt that heart in his hands, but he didn't. And that's almost reflective of the David Cash story that we spoke of in class, in which not doing something can almost be as harmful as doing something. In terms of Kidder's paradigms, my mind immediately goes to the long-term versus short-term consequences paradigm. And in this case, the transplant team was most likely thinking about the short term. They were thinking, we need to get this transplant done, we need to get this heart in him so we can, get home, go to work the next day, and go about our daily lives. However, they weren't thinking of the fact that transplanting this hypertrophic heart into the patient is probably not going to end well and have good medical outcomes for the patient. So there were a lot of red flags in the long term that they ignored. For these reasons, I have to disagree and debate the original decision of the court to support Dr. Parvatheneni. I think that he should have been held liable for the death, as well as the transplant cardiologist and the transplant surgeon. I think that they all played an equal role in this process in allowing something to continue and move forward that should not have ever happened. Now, I do agree that the Loyola University Medical Center did commit institutional negligence because Dr. Parvatheneni's role may not have been made clear to him. So I believe that all parties should have been in the wrong in this case, because when there is a loss of life, that's absolutely inexcusable.